Okay, so I tried to do another live stream, which I just don't know how long that I basically able to do this, because basically it is already reaching the common daily interruption time that I usually got, probably in the next 30 to 1 hour perhaps, even though it's basically pretty long, especially when I didn't have many things to do except just trying to record some good behavior perhaps after this, or maybe just doing it without any recording, because to be honest I basically didn't do any live stream yesterday because I just suddenly got a lot of issue on my main job of tasks, so I just need to prioritize that first in order to resolve the issue as soon as possible. And to be honest, even though there is no meetings that I basically need to attend, but basically resolving an issue is actually wasting a lot of your time, because for some reason, in order to make it, in order to finally able to resolve those problems, I basically need around, I don't know, 3 hours perhaps, which is basically pretty annoying, even though the root cause is actually pretty simple. But for some reason those kind of thing is just the one that you basically need to do at a certain point of time in your work, because not obviously not every day is gonna be as easy as you are trying to expect it, because technology is kind of like life or destiny that you need to accept in your life, because not all, not everything is obviously goes the way that you are already planned before. So sometimes we are also often forgetting about something that we basically want to improve, and it's actually really blocking something, or blocking your productivity in the futures perhaps, I'm not sure. So yeah so I basically, even though I didn't do any live stream yesterday, so I decided to process the gaming footage that I already tried to record during my vacation in hotel room. So I decided to do it 3 videos, which is basically not all of them, because for some reason when I try to convert the video gaming footage from the MKV format into the MP4 using Handbrake open source application, it's basically make the size bigger than what I basically expected, than the original file itself, even though the original file is actually have a full HD resolution. So I decided to reduce into HD resolution in order to reduce the size, but it is actually still much bigger than the original itself, which is, I just don't get it why. Maybe there are several settings that I basically need to do in the application, in the converter, I'm not sure. So that's the reason why I decided to do it the shortest amount of video first, so the one that didn't have a very long length of video, even though the longest video that I basically try to record is probably only around 20 to 30 minutes if I'm not mistaken. So it's basically much shorter than what I usually do, or what I basically haven't processed and uploaded yet, because the iMovie caching is also pretty annoying, because it's definitely make my storage run out of space if I decided to leave my laptop processing all of that stuff. So besides the not only the size that was basically pretty big, but also the processing time to process the video is also pretty long, not like usual. I'm not sure, maybe the processor on my MacBook Air is actually getting slower all the time. I'm not sure, because definitely if you talk about the old PC or old laptop, perhaps some of people decided to do a repasta to the processor in order to prevent overheating, which is basically really bad for performance, because when the processor is overheating, it is actually reduce its performance pretty big, perhaps, or I'm not sure, because I never really repasta a processor unless the one that I basically just bought secondhand, if I'm not mistaken, for my non-main ITX gaming PC. So I basically have several gaming PC, but all of them were actually an old, same generation. So it's probably the same, like a second or a third generation of Intel in the desktop. So I so the cheapest one is actually what I try to install on my Alienware X51. So I basically have those things, even though it's not really in a good condition, but consider it is actually the only gaming or desktop PC that I basically able to use the biggest watt power adapter for a laptop. So yeah, that's the reason why it's basically use a Pico PSU power supply, Pico size. So it's basically didn't have any kind of AC to DC converter in the power supply itself. So the conversion between AC to DC is actually done on the adapter itself, even though for there is actually a higher watt for the Pico PS power supply, which is around 400 watts, even though the adapter itself is actually only around 250 watts. So I just don't get it why it's just able to do that, even though it's pretty expensive to buy those kind of power supply, because yeah, it's definitely a fanless design. So unlike the regular power supply, which obviously have a fan, and even though it's definitely not that loud, but it still have some sound just like your laptop perhaps, which basically pretty struggle. So that's the reason why I basically wanted to buy a fanless laptop such as the MacBook Air, the newest MacBook Air obviously, but yeah, I just don't know when, because for some reason I just wanted to fulfill my order desire first, which is obviously more expensive, but hopefully it is actually the one that basically make myself better. So man, there's something in my mouth which basically I just need to swallow it instead of get rid of it. So my other gaming PC, so I have actually four desktop PC, which is my main old gaming PC, which is the Intel i3 322 3220. So it was applied on my Jonesbow, or it's no longer Jonesbow, it's applied on EVGA Hadron, which is basically pretty big case compared to the previous Jonesbow U2 that I basically tried to use. But yeah, the reason why I basically tried to change into this case is because the case is actually pretty rare. It is actually one of my dream case, used to be my dream case, because it used a 1U power supply, which is a little bit smaller than the SFX power supply, but it's actually a little bit longer. So that's the reason why it's basically can save more space into a very small ITX case, such as the Delta, or I'm quite forgot, which is one of the most most expensive ITX case, perhaps because it's used a full aluminum design, obviously. So it's also usually called as the flex PSU size. And it's usually used for server for some reason. If you talk about server, it's actually doesn't really need to save some space, but maybe because it was need to implement in the rack, which is obviously need to be as slim as possible as well. So I just don't get it. So that is actually my main old gaming PC, even though I basically never really use it ever since I basically already had my dream gadget, or is actually ever since I basically had a console again. So yeah, but obviously the dream gadget is actually the most powerful things that I basically own right now, even though it's still technically not that powerful at all if you talk about modern games, because it still technically need to run at lowest graphic quality as possible in order to make it the game smooth. But yeah, compares to what my old gaming PC desktop is definitely still not sufficient at all to run the modern games to be playable. So yeah, so the next one is actually the one that I basically tried to bought from my college friend, since he's basically wanted to upgrade their PC, so I decided to bought his old PC, which is basically a little bit better than my main desktop old gaming PC, even though it was actually the second generation of i5. So it was already a quad core instead of dual core that what 3220 had. So it was a 2500 i5, if I'm not mistaken. So even though it was actually installed on a built up PC from Acer, so and yeah, so I basically try to remove the VGA that I basically tried to bought it previously as well, because for some reason the VGA is not really in the good condition, so it can only be act as an HDMI output for my oldest gaming PC, even though it's not technically the oldest, because it just reminds me of my oldest gaming PC, even though I was basically bought those last PC is actually the same time that I tried to build my main old gaming PC. So it's around 2013, if I'm not mistaken. So it's almost 10 years ago. It's already, or it's over 10 years ago, which is, I just can't imagine, because that time is actually the same time that I basically lost my main hard drive, 2 terabyte hard drive, that I am still not able to recover its data until today, because it's definitely pretty expensive, just like what I already explained in the previous live stream. So yeah, and so since the 2500 is already got their own internal GPU, so that's the reason why I just, and the motherboard is also already support HDMI output instead of what my oldest gaming PC, or the slowest desktop PC spec that I basically had, is actually the Intel Core 2 Duo E8400. So the motherboard itself, it didn't have any HDMI output, so that's the reason why I tried to install those GTX 750 Ti, which is, or is actually 750, regular 750, I'm not sure, into those PC, even though it's definitely gonna be a very bottleneck computers. But yeah, consider I basically able to use directly the HDMI output instead of just using VGA cable, which is basically pretty annoying, because yeah, HDMI cable is usually really bulky bulky cables, so I never really found a very good VGA cables, because maybe VGA cables is kind of like already deprecate, because it's obviously cannot transfer the sound as well from the devices. Even though, yeah, if you talk about my monitor, my main monitor that I still use right now, it actually still includes a VGA input, which I never really use, because, so yeah, that's the reason why it's pretty annoying when I basically want to connect many devices into my monitor, because yeah, for some reason I basically need to use HDMI switch, but I just don't get it why the Mac OS is just not supported with those HDMI switch. It's only support for Windows and, I don't know, other devices such as console, perhaps, I'm not sure. But right now I haven't bought those HDMI switch again, because the last time I basically used those HDMI switches actually connected it to the TV, but since the TV is suddenly broken for some reason, so at the time that the TV is removed from the bracket, it's just forgot to unplug the HDMI switch, which basically destroy the HDMI switch. So it's hard to explain, but yeah, it's actually a cheap HDMI switch as well. I think it's only around $2 if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, it's already 16 minutes, because even though, yeah, most of the things that I already tried to talk about is not really a motivation. It's only a life related things that I don't know if you basically can inspire from this kind of thing or not, but yeah, because yeah, I just don't know what kind of things that I basically wanted to do, because yeah, I'm actually wanted to do a proper content, but yeah, I just don't know how to set up a proper content video, and my stomach is actually not feel very good. I actually wanted to do some natural call or not, because yeah, it's obviously already 17 minutes, which is basically almost the same amount of time that I basically tried to do when I didn't live stream for a day, even though I'm not sure whether next week I am still able to do this kind of live stream or not, because the daily free time that I basically got for around 2 weeks is gonna be ended, even though, yeah, probably I actually wanted to focus on processing the old gaming footage, so yeah, maybe I will try to exchange the live stream into that, because for some reason it's basically have the same amount of viewers then, but sadly it's not the way that I expected. But yeah, I just try to be patient and try to accept those fate, and hopefully, I don't know, when will I finally got viral, perhaps in a good way, obviously, because I really hate when people just try to be viral in a bad way, and yeah, I just don't want to be like that. And to be honest, I actually wanted to be piece by piece. I don't know what's the correct explanation for that, so I just don't want to be popular in the very short time, so it's need to be concurrently, perhaps. What if I try to use the definition from engineering purposes, software engineering? So yeah, man, I'm started to not able to think clearly, because my my stomach it doesn't really feel very good. So, but yeah, obviously after I basically got nitro call, I'm most likely not able to do this live stream again because I never really do live stream more than once in a day, even though there is several days that I try to do that. But yeah, for some reason when I try to talk in a language that I basically not really good at, it's basically makes me feel using the same word over and over again, which is basically bad for explanation, perhaps, I'm not sure. So yeah, yeah, I basically already tried to explain my PC collections, even though I obviously will not name this live stream as the one that basically represent the content, because yeah, I pretty much doing a random talks because